Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Habitual Linecrosser, and today we're talking about hypersonics. HLC, you made a video before talking about hypersonics. What is different about this one than the last video? Well, this one we're going to explain a lot of the problems and why it is so difficult to create a hypersonic object of any kind. So first of all, what is hypersonic? Hypersonic is by definition anything that travels at Mach 5 or greater. Now, I don't like using Mach because Mach is the speed of sound, and the speed of sound can vary based on what elevation it is, and it, of course, doesn't move in a vacuum, or maybe it moves really fast in a vacuum. Look, I'm not a physicist. I'm just going to kind of break this down as easy as I can for you guys from a missile defense perspective. But in case you're wondering exactly how fast Mach 5 is, it is 1,715 meters per second, or 1.7 kilometers per second, or 3,836.35 miles per hour. Why is hypersonic such a big deal nowadays? Well, because they don't know exactly what they're talking about when they say hypersonic. Hypersonic should be actually referred to as terminal hypersonic. Now, the phases of flight of a ballistic missile are LBAST, launch, boost, apogee, separation, and terminal. Now, in the terminal phase of flight, your object is usually just falling. This is where a hypersonic or a terminal hypersonic will differ from a regular object. This means that in the terminal phase of flight, it's supposed to be continuing to accelerate. Well, why is that such a problem? Because now when you have that object in its terminal phase continuing to accelerate, you now have to add more fuel on board, which in turn adds more weight, which in turn you need to have more fuel to offset that more weight so that you don't have a reduction in range. So you see how this just becomes a consistent problem, but this is only one part of the major issue that there is with hypersonic objects. Let's say you don't go ballistic and instead you decide you're going to do a hypersonic cruise missile. Now, cruise missiles, unlike ballistic missiles by definition, they have lateral surfaces which produce lift because they don't have a ballistic trajectory. That is by definition a cruise missile. All cruise missiles fly flat, and they usually fly at around 500 miles per hour until they get right around their terminal phase, and then they just accelerate on in. Some of these go up to Mach 2, some of them go up to Mach 3. It really depends on which country you're looking at with these types of missiles. That being said, if you wanted something that could fly along that flight path at Mach 5 or greater, you now have to have a lot of fuel on board, or that object isn't going to go very far. So what a lot of countries are doing, this is what Russia claimed that they did, this is what the United States is now doing, is they carry these hypersonic missiles on bombers. The US just successfully tested out an AGM 183 Alpha. I think I'm just going from memory here. I'm probably dead wrong, and if I am wrong, it'll be somewhere on the screen here when I figure out exactly what it is. But anyways, that was America's first tested hypersonic air-launched ballistic missile, more or less. Some people call it a cruise missile, but those people don't really understand ballistic trajectories and arcs. Okay, so let's say you figured out a way to solve having enough fuel on board to make an object go that fast for long periods of time without offsetting the weight so much that you would need more fuel to compensate for that. Let's say that you just broke the laws of physics and you went ahead and did that. All right, that makes sense. Cool. Up next, you have what air pressure and the atmosphere are going to do to that object. In the 1960s, the United States had designed something called the Sprint missile. Now, the Sprint missile is probably the ugliest missile that is ever designed ever, but it was really cool in what it did, and it went around Mach 10 in under 10 seconds in the 1960s because America is just better at everything than everybody else everywhere. Now, the interesting thing about this, and we'll go ahead and show the video now, is as this thing was hitting its stage 2 and accelerating up past around Mach 8, it would get coated in a layer of plasma. The object starts to glow if you pay attention to it. That is because that missile was pushing through the atmosphere so fast that it was creating friction along the outside and was actually causing little molecules and everything that hits it to be hit so hard they would combust and create a layer of plasma, more or less. I'm sure that there's a lot more sciencey way to explain that, but pretty much you're creating so much friction, it's cooking that object. And in a matter of about 10 seconds, the Sprint missile was right around 4,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's important to note that considering the melting point for titanium is 3,034 degrees. So now you have to create an object that can deal with that amount of heat for long periods of time, because keep in mind the Sprint missile was just a short-term boom, get there as quick as you can, blow up. People are talking about things that go a long distance. So then you decide that the best thing you can do at that point is go exo-atmospheric with a ballistic missile, similar to the American Trident II or the American Minuteman III. Both of those are exo-atmospheric intercontinental ballistic missiles. Yes, one of them is sub-launched. Some people are like, well, it's a sub-launched ballistic missile. Still intercontinental, still has that kind of range to it, still goes exo-atmospheric. So For science, we're just going to do it this way. So those objects go outside the atmosphere. Now outside the atmosphere, you're not having to deal with any kind of atmospheric punishment. So the maximum speed of a Minuteman III is Mach 23. The maximum speed of a Trident II is Mach 24. But as those things re-enter the atmosphere slows them down significantly. So then we go back to our initial problem. How are you going to have enough fuel on board to get that thing outside the atmosphere and enough fuel on board that as it comes back in the atmosphere, you now have that object, what is remaining of it, the reentry vehicle, or RV for short, accelerating as it's heading towards its target. You now have to have more fuel on the front side to get the back side where it needs to go, or you need to reduce the overall range of the object. You see, again, the crisis that we're in here, which is why the US has straight up said, like, we're testing one, but we don't have a hypersonic missile yet because we know what hypersonic actually means and we don't lie about our capability. I do want to address something here that I probably should have addressed sooner in the video, is hypersonic does not mean maneuvering. Nowhere in that definition is maneuvering a requirement. Matter of fact, maneuvering threats have been around since the 1970s. Excessive lateral acceleration, they have walking gips, they have all sorts of different things that these systems can do to try and evade air defense systems. This is nothing new. Nowhere in the definition of hypersonic does it have to maneuver. But it seems like everybody who owns any kind of news agency says, well, hypersonic means it has to maneuver. That's not a thing. That's not true. That's not real. Hypersonic is a speed threshold. Hypersonic does not mean maneuverability. But let's go ahead and go into that maneuverability. So let's say you went ahead and solved the heat issue. You went ahead and solved the range issue. You went ahead and solved the weight issue. You went ahead and solved everything, all the physics that is telling you you can't do this right now. And you managed to keep the cost low enough that you're not spending several $100 billion on an object because of the materials it has to be made out of to deal with that kind of punishment. Let's say you solved all of those problems. Now, you happen to be a person somewhere and say, I want it to maneuver. If you turn any one of those objects, let's say you solved all of those problems, and that object turns more than maybe a fraction of a degree while moving at those speeds, it's going to just explode into a million tiny pieces, worse than the Challenger space shuttle. So let me explain how missile defense works. People think if you go faster, you're harder to predict. No. If you go faster, you're actually a little easier to predict. So let's talk about, let's say, the Kinzhal. Everyone wants to talk about the Kinzhal. Maximum speed of Mach 10. Okay, let's look at what Mach 10 is. Mach 10 is 3,430 meters per second. That's pretty fucking quick. That's 3 kilometers, almost 3.5 kilometers a second. For reference, the American THAAD air defense system, Terminal High Altitude Area Air Defense. No one corrected me in that last video. Is it area air defense or area defense? I just don't feel like Googling it. Anyways, THAAD guys, help me out. The maximum unclassified range of the THAAD system is 2,900 kilometers. If you're traveling at 3.4 kilometers per second and they pick you up at their maximum detectable range of 2,900 kilometers, I did the math here. It's 852 seconds from detection to impact. Do you have any idea what I could do in 852 seconds? In case you're wondering, I went ahead and just followed the math anyways. That's 14.2 minutes. There's a lot I can do in 14 minutes. So anyways, jumping back to the air defense game, your object is coming in. And as it's coming in, that system is trying to predict exactly where it's going to hit. Remember, these systems don't protect things that are way off over here. They don't care about things that are way off over there. I'm sorry, this is war. This is not nice. We have to protect critical infrastructure, airfields, bases, things like that. That is our job, to protect those things in air defense. So missile coming in, and the system decides, hey, it's going to hit right about here. And it has an area of probability, a circle, right? Well, as that thing gets closer, that circle actually gets smaller. Or as that thing accelerates, that circle actually gets smaller, because scientists and really smart people know that if it's moving that fast, it can only turn so sharp. And through years of us watching what the enemy is launching and how they're launching and how their things maneuver, keep in mind, every time you launch a missile in this world, you show somebody else your capability. Every time we test a missile, somebody's watching it. Every time they test a missile, we're watching it. Every time you fire something somewhere, you show somebody what you can do. And they are paying very, very close attention to what you're doing. Keep that in mind. So as that thing is screaming in, the area of probability gets smaller. So then that system goes, all right, I need to fire right here, right this second, off of this launcher with this missile. There's a very, very long process that I can't get into. I've gotten like a 15-hour class on it, and I still don't fully understand it. But anyways, missile comes up. Missile says, I'm going to meet you right about here. Enemy missile coming in, and let's say that enemy missile doesn't have any maneuvering capability. Boom, missile comes up, hits it, smokes it, boom, life goes on. And let's say that it does maneuver. Well, now we get into like TTPs and things that I can't really explain very much. Or let's say it breaks open and there's a bunch of little small stuff coming out. Look, I'm just going to tell you, if you can think that a missile can do it, there's a way to combat it. Unfortunately, I can't really go and like, I want to be like, well, we just do this. And you would hear me say that and you'd be like, that's so fucking simple. Yeah, of course that's going to work. That is the easiest shit ever. Yes, the simplest answer is often the answer that you should go with. But unfortunately, I can't really dive into it. Well, what if it maneuvers, if it dives, if it does this? I can't dive into that as much, unfortunately. But trust me, there are there are things to deal with it. So now, let's say you have this object. You finally have a hypersonic object. The hypersonic, meaning terminal hypersonic, it has broken the laws of physics. It is made of something that isn't going to cook in 4,000 degrees. It is cost efficient enough that you're not going to have to break the bank of your entire GDP to actually fire this damn thing. And let's say you found a new material that no one has ever heard of that can deal with the punishment of like several hundred G's getting shoved into the side of it so you can maneuver it while it's coming in. Congratulations, you have an actual hypersonic object. But as of right now, everyone has ones that go hypersonic outside the atmosphere, exo-atmospheric hypersonics, aside from some of the things that we're testing. And because we understand the punishment and the physics associated with these things, we know that they're not going to be able to go long distances. So hypersonics, while they may be fast, they're going to be short distance operations. So keep that in mind. That about wraps it up. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover on hypersonic. So I hope that made sense. I know my brain kind of went like into Narnia on certain things and I was like all over the place. I'm sorry about that. That's just how my brain works. But if you have any more questions, please write some in the comment section. I'll answer them as best that I possibly can. So as always, do not give in to the 22 a day. Every single one of you are amazing. If you'd like to support, please go to habituallinecrosser.com and support the channel. Play me out.